Hello, welcome to the Acquivore podcast, episode 8. I'm your host, Don Mansfield. I'm here with Nick Sanders of Apogee Consulting and Jennifer Townsend of Contracting Courses. Today we're going to be discussing a new executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity. But before we get into that, let me just tell you a little bit about Dunn Acquisition. We're a federal acquisition training company. We currently offer courses in the DFARS course it's called, and simplified acquisition procedures. We also have in the past taught courses on flow down of clauses to subcontractors. And we also recently I've done some webinars on demand. So if you have any training needs, go ahead and send me an email through my website or give me a call, and I'll see if I can help you. And Jennifer, can you tell us a little bit about contracting courses?
Yes, my name is Jennifer Townsend. I have known Dawn for a long time. We worked at DAU together, and I also have a training business um, in completely different topics. My topics right now are contract clauses and commercial contracting, and a couple of other courses on the way that hopefully trying to tickle the itch that nobody else is tickling in terms of the topics that are out there. So that's me in a nutshell.
Nick?
Hi, Nick Sanders here. Um, Unlike Don and Jennifer, I've not ever worked for the federal government. I've just worked for federal government contractors for a rather long time. And I don't really focus on training, although training is something I can and do upon occasion. I really focus in my consultancy on assisting contractors with the various administrative needs of the FAR, the DFARS, cost accounting standards, what have you. And then I would like to mention that I have a blog. Don is showing you the latest blog entry. I've maintained this blog now for a pretty long time. And so it's kind of, for me anyway, a repository or a history of what's happened in the federal acquisition environment over longer than the past decade. Thanks, Don.
All right. So this week, Jennifer drew our attention to a recent executive order issued May 12th on improving the nation's cybersecurity. Um, before we get into the specifics of the executive order, Jennifer had some information on the background. Enlighten
Well,
us.
mostly, no, I mean, I'm not so sure the background is the right phrase to use because I think presidents have been trying to tackle cyber security for some period of time. And in my mind, I just find it interesting that they started using the term cybersecurity because for some period of time, there was information security or covered defense information or data subject to the Privacy Act. And so I think that's part of what's contributed to where we're at is the security seems to have grown over time in response to various instances, as opposed to looked at holistically from the outset. Now, I came to government contracting, I think, a year or two after you did, Don, and I'm sure Nick was still in the field. But right when I started, or about the time I started, the firmer, is that what it was
Yeah,
called?
remember that. Yeah.
was discontinued. So I never actually awarded a contract subject to the firmer. And but the firmer was thick, kind of like the FAR, wasn't it? Did you award? I mean,
Yeah, they canceled it like before I even knew what it was, but I do kind of remember it.
yeah, and it caused and I think that's why I wanted to kind of start with this because I think that some of what was happening there contributes to where we're at today with this playing massive catch up, so to speak. And so they canceled it, but there was some period of time, like there were people who were like, well, how do we buy IT now? And so there was somebody who was requiring these krill comps, computer resources lifecycle whatever plan, and they weren't required, but someone was still requiring them. It was just like this kind of funky situation. And then
Yeah,
there
I
was the
think
IT reform.
wasn't there a time where they were requesting corrosion control plans for software
Yeah, well,
programs? Yeah,
all kinds of things.
yeah.
I mean, it was very interesting, and I think some of this must have predated the buy commercial, if that makes sense. So I think
Hmm.
there was this thought process that if the government was buying IT, it was buying programmers to write software and to put together actual computers and things of that sort. And then of course at the same time private industry had like shot way ahead of the government in terms of like software capabilities, computer capabilities, etc. So then the government was buying a lot of software and computer items commercially, but there wasn't really this massive, or I shouldn't even say massive, there wasn't a concerted or focused effort on the security of these applications. And so then you fast forward to, data breaches, people like government employees and or government contractors had their identities
Yeah.
compromised through software breaches. And that was, I think, 2008, 9 time frame. And so then a couple clauses came about, and then 12, 13, 14, sometime in that areas when we had the Kaspersky lab or the covered telecommunications. And so basically what was happening is every couple of years, the government would discover some sort of, either spying attempt that had been hardwired into computer equipment. The covered telecommunications, that was very interesting because it was, it was apparently I think they attribute it to China. I'm not entirely
Hmm.
sure, but they had like some sort of software that would transmit everything that was coming across telephone lines, to China. So there was some security there. And then the most recent, I think, was Solar Winds, and the Solar Winds was malicious, malware that had been embedded into a commercial product, and then the commercial product, pushed out an update, as all software does these days, and then those who uploaded or ran the update then embedded malware in their computers, and lo and behold, that included a large number of private firms as well as the government agencies. And so this Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack actually isn't even addressed in this executive order because this executive order was focused primarily on some of these prior episodes. And Nick was saying before we started that he first blogged about this on in 2009, was it?
2010, October 2010.
And out of curiosity, what was the premise? That we're not secure enough?
No, well, that was part of it. The other part was at that point, the Department of Homeland Security had posted that they were going to make cybersecurity and supply chain security an an evaluation criteria. So at that time, I said, if you're not securing your supply chains and yourselves against cyber intrusion, you are not going to be getting awards from the Department of Homeland Security. So that was, almost, but not quite 11 years ago. And of course, it's a blog with a minor readership. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Nobody cared what I said. But it is fun to look back and go, I told you so. You wouldn't listen, but I told you so.
Well, and since then, I think the DoD came out with what year was the cybersecurity clause, the primary cybersecurity clause?
2013.
2017.
2013.
What is it?
Well, there's two
I
of them.
say
I looked at them ahead of
first
time because there
20
was the
years.
cybersecurity maturity model certification, which was probably the 17 one, because that's the one that I think just everyone kind of lost their
Yeah.
rocker on the
But the
contractor
first
side of the
clause,
house.
was it the 712 clause? I think that was 2013 when it was first put out for public comment, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that
Sounds
was the
about right.
safeguarding covered defense information and cyber incident reporting. And so
Yeah.
that kind of brings us into this executive order because some of what this executive order is getting at, I think the DoD clause, at least the safeguarding covered defense information and cyber incident reporting, and to some degree, maybe the cybersecurity maturity model certification addresses. But we'll get into that. So I just felt like that background is a little bit important because the government is definitely playing catch up to incidents that have already happened. And I was reading some opinion pieces on this executive order in preparation for this discussion, and one of them was saying that I think what was interesting about the solar winds is the company that caught the malware on the solar winds was not even DoD or the Cyber Command, and so there's this government agency that's funded with billions, that exists primarily to keep government networks secure. And it had no idea that the SolarWinds was infected with malware. In fact, it was a private commercial firm that found the malware and brought the whole thing to light. So I just thought that was very interesting as, the government has thrown a lot of money at this and is going to continue to throw a lot of money at it. But private industry is, probably one step ahead of the government
Yeah.
for whatever reason.
It's more than interesting, Jennifer. It's tragic. It's tragic. You could get rid of the entire cyber command, apparently, get rid of all that budget spend and just hire this private security through one government contract and say, here you go, help us out. And you would probably get better results. That's a tragedy.
Well,
What
and
are these
unfortunately,
people doing? They're not doing their jobs. So what are they doing?
well, they're busy writing 18-page executive orders, I guess. I don't know. I'm kidding partially, but so this executive order was a difficult read because there's all kinds of within 30 days, within 60
Yeah.
days, within 120 days, and this, that, and the other. So trying to cut in between all of that, there's essentially, how many sections? Is it 13 sections? 11 sections, but the first one is policy kind of background, and then it launches into these pronged approach, approaches, a multi-pronged approach or whatever. So the first one is in section 2, and it's titled "Removing Barriers to Sharing Threat Information." This one struck me as very odd because, and then it seems to imply, it doesn't imply, I mean, it comes actually right out and says it, that current contract terms or restrictions, this is the second or third paragraph or sentence in paragraph A under section 2. Current contract terms or restrictions may limit the sharing of such threat or incident information with executive departments and agencies. And I was thinking, what contract clauses or whatever limit those? Because I wrote a course on contract clauses recently. I've had the pleasure or not pleasure of reading intimately every single clause, and in the FAR, I didn't go into all the agency supplements, but nothing jumped to my mind as something that would limit the sharing of such threat or incident information. And so then as you read through it, one of the first tasks is to review the FAR and the DFARs. Less mention about other supplements, but to see what there is that precludes reporting. So I'm much more intimately familiar with the DFARs as far as agency supplements go than any of the others. And so the only clause I could think of, and I asked Don to pull it up so we could just take a quick look at it, is the 52239-1, which is titled Privacy or Security Safeguards. And just as a side note, I'll give Don and Nick a chance to talk here in a minute, but just as a side note, I think what's really interesting is FAR Part 39 is the information technology part of the FAR. And in theory, all of these information technology, cybersecurity things should be probably in FAR Part 39, but at some point they started putting them in FAR Part 4 and then kind of cross-referencing them in FAR Part 39, which I think is contributing to some of this chaos that's out there. But this privacy or security safeguards you're supposed to use whenever you want a secure system, which anymore these days would be all the time. And so, but the paragraph A there says the contractor shall not publish or disclose in any manner without the contracting officer's written consent the details of any safeguards either designed or developed by the contractor under this contract or otherwise provided by the government. In other words, what they're not supposed to disclose is the safeguards that they're employing to keep the network safe. Because if they disclose that, then that would be just like giving hackers an open door. And then if you look at paragraph C, it makes it very clear that if any threats or hazards are discovered by either the government or the contractor, or if existing safeguards have ceased to function, the discoverer shall immediately bring this situation to the attention of the other party. So it seems to me like we already have a clause that requires reporting of threats or hazards. And so this whole section 2 it looks like it's trying to duplicate what we already have, because after they talk about identifying existing barriers to reporting, they then talk about drafting a new clause to require reporting.
Don't we have a DFARS clause that mandates reporting as well, Jennifer?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
That's what that 52.
I know that because as a contractor, as part of CPSRs, we get tested on compliance with that clause. So,
See, and
I mean,
what I was going to say is I think part of what's causing this issue is, you know, the 52239-1, which has been around for a long time, which does require reporting. It doesn't define a threat or a hazard. And so contractors, you know, are left to define it themselves, and nobody's thrown that clause at them for, well, not that I'm aware of. I didn't do an exhaustive case law search, but nobody's really thrown that clause at them for not complying. And so as we moved into more cybersecurity issues, DoD created this cyber incident reporting, which is, I think, much more specific. It defines what has to be reported and so on. So this is my first where I'd really like to hear from Don and Nick. I mean, we're relying on contractors to self-report when they've been hacked or their information has been compromised. How enticing is it to self-report this?
Want me to answer, Don, or do you want to answer?
Yeah, I would think you would have a better answer than me.
All right. I'm going to answer the question, and then I'll go on a rant of my own after. You know, I'm me. It is not enticing at all. It is not enticing. You just have to look at a couple 4 years ago, Target. We all know Target. We all shop at Target. They reported a data breach where credit card information was stolen. Their stock tanked. And so the DFARS criteria, at least the DFARS clause, establishes reporting criteria and timeliness standards and all that. And that's very unappetizing to most publicly traded companies, because the minute they report, they're thinking their stock is going to go down the tubes. They're going to be on, you know, Jim Cramer that night, and the CEO is going to have to defend why he or she didn't budget enough money for cybersecurity. And other companies as well come to mind, but I'm not going to get into it. But it's not appetizing, and the idea that somebody can go from we've been breached or somebody got in the back door or whatever it is to a report to the DoD in that time period doesn't understand the level of reporting and discussion that will take place with the general counsel, the board of directors, the executive management. It's going to go up there, and they're going to be a lot concerned, and they're going to really hesitate to report. And then people like me are going to go, yeah, but you signed a contract. You have to report. You don't get an option, right? So That's my story. My rant on this, though, before I let Don jump in, because I got a rant, is actually Section 1 policy. And first paragraph, fourth sentence, protecting our nation. I like how they capitalize nation. Protecting our nation from malicious cyber actors requires the federal government to what? What's that word, Jennifer and Don? Partner. And you know I've ranted about this before on this podcast, right? Some episode. The DoD in particular, but a lot of government agencies no longer wants to partner with its contractors. Everything is arm's length at best. Now I got an executive order telling me that policy is out the door, at least with respect to cybersecurity. And if I'm a contractor, I'm saying, fine, you want me to partner over here, I want you to partner over there. You know, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So anyway, I just want to point that out. It requires a partnership. The federal government, for the first time in, I don't know what, 25 years, has finally come back to, I get a better product, I have a better contractual outcome, everybody wins when we put the adversarial nature of the relationship to the side and we partner to accomplish the mission. Thank you.
But that's only in cybersecurity. I'm teasing.
Thank you. Anyway, I just had to rant. I gave you my answer though first, so.
So to answer Jennifer's question, I guess, is it any less appetizing to self-report for like, an ethics violation? Like, aren't there certain things that need to be self-reported if you have like an ethics violation or a whistleblower complaint or something like that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's a whole clause on mandatory reporting, but it only has to be reported timely. That's the word. It has to be reported timely. You can define timely 97 different ways, and believe me, 15 lawyers will define it 97 different ways. Whereas the DFARS clause, to my recollection, without pulling it up here, has a very specific number of hours or days.
Yeah, it's like 72 hours or something.
Thank you. Yes, 72 hours, almost impossible to achieve.
Well, and I feel like I feel like with an ethics violation as a firm, you can always discount it as a bad actor. Oh, we hired the wrong employee, and so we fired that person now, and we're moving on. Whereas when you have a major cybersecurity incident, and say that you are a software firm, it's like saying, oh, our whole core product is flawed. Hey, government, our whole core product is flawed. Come on, join the party. And I feel like that's part of this. I just don't know that there's ever going to be like this rush to report from, and so I think that's why they're trying to mandate it by clause because it's not necessarily appetizing, especially, I mean, I think it will vary from firm to firm, but it's not appetizing to report system or security flaws.
Right, and some of the criticisms I've seen of the executive order, of the few I had a chance to read, basically said what needs to be reported exactly and to whom, right? And if you can't tell me those things, I'm not likely to do a good job. I think that's reasonable criticism.
Well, I don't expect that to be hashed out in an executive order any more than I'd expect that to be hashed out in a statute. So, I mean, contractors shouldn't feel they need to do anything right now in response to this executive order.
Because I love that you said that. I love it, Don. Where will the class deviation of implementing this executive order tomorrow come out? How many days or weeks will it take? Because that's the next step.
I don't know if there will be a deviation because there's so much undefined. Like,
how many
they give 90 days for I forgot who to report to the FAR Council on improvements for 60 days. And then
How
the
many
FAR Council has to
classifications?
put out a proposed rule within 90 days.
Don, I know what it says, Don, but how many class deviations came out in the last 3 months of the Trump administration implementing Trump executive orders? I'm telling you, why would this be different?
Well, I guess we'll see.
No, I mean, but okay, I just think it's real. I agree with you. They don't have to comply with the executive order until it's implemented in a contract clause that
Right,
they have awarded, right?
right.
I agree, but I think it's naive to think that the rulemaking timeframes specified herein are going to control that. I think history has
Well, what I
shown
think
us
is
executive orders get implemented through class deviations quickly. Sorry, Jennifer, to you.
Sometimes.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's naive to feel like reporting incidents is really going to do much to preclude them in the future. I mean, I think there's this thought that, oh, as we report incidents, then we can do data sharing. And to some degree, to some degree, uh, Section 5, establishing a cyber safety review board. He wants to establish a board to review these instances and recommend, updates in the future. But my experience is that software and computer technology moves so fast that, it's not like building an airplane where that technology, goes. I mean, I don't know how fast it goes, but I don't think I think software moves a lot faster. Um, so I feel like the meat of the executive order is in Section 3, where it talks about modernizing federal government cybersecurity. And I think it's not just Section 3, but Section 4, enhancing software supply chain security. And I actually had to look up some of these terms because I was like, what does this really mean? And so one of them is this zero trust architecture. Well, zero trust architecture is exactly what it sounds like. Trust no one. And so even if your computer is plugged into the network, it's like every single time you turn it on, they're going to have to scan it for viruses or, do something like that. Um, and so that's kind of this thought process, is this zero trust architecture is that everything all the time needs to, nobody can be trusted. By nobody, no IT piece of equipment or software or whatever. And then there's also this, I mean, this software as a service strikes me as a silly term, and infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. I mean, basically the thought process is, and it's kind of like cloud based. I mean, I saw a t-shirt once that said, there is no cloud, it's somebody else's computer. And that's really what it is. It's like if the government's going to start using other computers or other people's equipment, then there's security issues associated with that. And so that's kind of where they're starting. I mean, and again, they should have been thinking of this 10, 15, 20 years ago, but instead they wait until they've got, we've got the cloud already operating. We've got, and I think all of NMCI was using private computers for the entire Navy's computer system. And so I think there's, the ship is almost, well, I shouldn't say almost, the ship has already sailed on these things, and the government's now trying to row the boat out to catch up to it. Um, what bothers me about this is, and especially like a software bill of materials, is like every single software that is going to be bought now has to have this, like, well, we developed this source code, and here's what we did while we developed it to make sure it was secure. And then we used this open source code as part of it, and here's what we did. And then we used this third party source code, to create this software platform. And so they're going to turn that into the government. Who knows who in the government is going to look at it and see, oh, this is good or this isn't. I think that's part of this issue. Is like, who knows? But above and beyond that is like then there's some period, like the executive order actually says, once we put this, NIST is supposed to come up with this set of standards associated with this architecture and zero trust security and so on, and software bill of materials. And then once the standard is put out there, it's supposed to be modified into all existing contracts. And within a year after implementation, all existing software and platforms are supposed to come up with either a remediation plan or be, I guess, terminated or canceled. And so my fear is that the government's going to write itself out of support, because this is going to be very difficult for firms to comply with. Um, and as they strive to comply with it, they may just decide that it's easier to just not do business with the government. Whereas some of the opinion pieces associated with this executive order are saying, oh, well, the government's going to lead the way and use the power of the procurement purse to drive all of private industry to start meeting these standards. My opinion is that's not what's going to happen. So
Yeah,
what do you guys
that's
think?
wishful thinking.
I was confused by Section 4, enhancing the software supply chain security, because I thought they were going to talk about enhancing the contractor supply chain cybersecurity, right? To try to mitigate the risk of an adverse party getting in through a third or fourth tier subcontractor and getting up into the prime's design information. But that's not what it's about. They're talking about the development of commercial software and how it lacks transparency. They've got to get transparency into how Microsoft develops its source code. I'm like, yeah, really? You think how's that gonna work? So
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. Like in my mind, it's just not going to happen. It's gonna, like, the government's going to end up without any software.
right, like no. So Microsoft makes a lot of money from selling to the US government. I know that. So they're probably gonna go a long ways with this. But there are companies out there that don't rely on the US government sales channel for revenue, or don't rely as much. And I think they might laugh at this and say, no, thank you. And I also have a real question here. I read, and Ellen Lord tells me how important it is to have this software acquisition, agile software acquisition that was just created, and how it's a whole new way of buying, and it's great, and it's going to deliver software at the speed of relevance and all that stuff. How is this going to play in that? I mean, isn't this like putting an anchor on agile software acquisition? Am I wrong? What do you guys
Running through
think about it?
cement. I think you're exactly right. Yeah, no, it's going to be. I mean, I don't even know if these firms have a software bill of materials on the inside. Like,
Yeah, I never
I
heard
don't
that
know.
term before. I wanted to look if there's a data item for that software bill of materials. Never heard of it.
Well, you just stand by. I'm sure DAU will have a training course in it in about 3 days.
Yeah, they probably will, but
Right.
who
Yeah,
knows
my
what's going to be in it?
my point is, even if I created a software bill of materials, let's say I work at a savvy contractor and I could create something that I thought was a software bill of material, who in the government could evaluate it to determine whether it met the intent of the executive order and or the regulations and or the clauses that are to come? Who's competent?
Yeah,
All the people who are competent probably are working for your Amazons and Googles and Microsofts and Oracles. Sorry, I'm sure I've left companies out. No offense to the companies I left out. Right? I mean, who's going to review it? Is it going to go to your average contracting officer's technical representative? Who's empowered to review it? Who's
yeah.
empowered to approve it? Who's empowered to reject it? Who in the source selection board will be reviewing these things in the future?
Yeah. I attended the NCMA CART today. It's Contract Administrators Roundtable, and we did it through Zoom. And they brought a clause to my attention I'd never seen before, but it just came out in November. It's a DFARS clause, and it applies to everything, even commercial items, and it requires like a reporting of like a score or something like that, like a NIST score. Um, Let me see, DPC. I think
Is
it
this
was.
report during the solicitation phase of an award?
I think it was
Is
a
it the
clause.
cybersecurity model?
Is that it? Yes. No, assessment. Here it is. NIST SP 800-171 DoD assessment requirements. So there's certain assessment requirements um, that a contractor has to do, and they have to, let's see,
And once again, I see it's in 204,
right,
right? Your point earlier, I
right.
think, about why is this all over the place? I would stick it in part 209 and call it part of responsibility, but move on.
Right. But
Well,
anyway,
and
the
I think that, go ahead.
the issue that we were discussing is the flow down. So you have to do this self-assessment in accordance with this NIST publication, um, and then you report your self-assessment, and then you flow it down, and it includes flow like for commercial items, right? So
Yeah.
commercial item subcontractors are going to have to do this, right? And
Yep.
I guess what are we going to do with this information? Like, what's DoD going to do with all this information from like commercial subs? What
Well,
are we
and
doing?
they're just going to
Yeah,
file it until there's an incident, and then the press will be like, DOD knew there was an incident because it was reported, or or and see, I think this is where I go back to, and this is why I feel like the history is really important. I mean, at some point, DoD started buying information technology software platforms, and in a very kind of loosey goosey fashion, because I think there was this thought process. Well, if you're using Microsoft, or if you're using Adobe or whatever, there's not really that much risk, and there probably wasn't when you had a disk that you upload, put into your computer, and that was your program. But in the meantime, industry was fast forwarding to, that's an old model. You just download whatever software application you want to use from online, and go from there, which also comes with it, those updates and things like that. And it's becoming, when I was working for DoD, just even recently, it was becoming increasingly difficult to have normal software access, because of the security issues associated with that, and cloud security. And at DoDEA, it was like this disaster, because DoDEA is a school agency, a Department of Defense school agency. So how many school software people are going to do this cybersecurity model? I'll tell you, like, zero. And so then you end up, in procurement, this is one of those things where the contracting officer is the one, like, enforcing it, because you're the one who's going to fail a PMR or fail an audit at the contracting shop is. And the customer really could care less, like, the generally speaking. And I would say this isn't just ODIA. I would say the average customer, or KOTOR, or whatever they are, core, could care less about this cybersecurity maturity model certification. They only care about it once SolarWinds already happened. And so it's just this loosey goosey environment that we're now in. And I feel like it is kind of this big mess, because people are all over the place, and now we're asking for information and self-assessments and scoring, or third party assessments. That what are Again, this is where I go back to, who are we going to give that to? The DoDEA educator who really doesn't even know what it means?
right.
It's
Until it's an evaluation criterion and people lose work, lose revenue, means nothing. right? If you want to enforce any of this, you've got to make award decisions based on the input. And if you're
But
not
how do you
doing
do
that,
that?
it's a toothless tiger.
So how do you do that? How
How
do
do
you
you
make it an evaluation factor?
how do you write evaluation criteria? Where you
What's
say
that?
your cybersecurity reporting, you say your cybersecurity reporting in accordance with this clause is will be used, and here's the weighting that we're going to assign to it. And
Right.
if your
Okay, but
score is
what
below
do
a certain
you
amount,
what information do you use to make that evaluation?
their report.
But
What
if they didn't report
information do you?
anything, does that mean they have no incident?
Right.
No, that's not what this says. This says you will conduct an assessment and report the results of the assessment. Assessment is not a breach. It's how well do you do? How much control do you have in place?
Okay, so
That's
you're
what the whole
saying like
concept is.
this self-assessment here would be part of a source selection decision?
Yeah, just like past experience. That's all I'm saying.
Hmm.
Until you do that, it's meaningless. And same with the CMMC, right? And then you're going to find out that the big companies, your top 10 defense contractors, they're going to be all over this and they're going to be great. You know who's not going to be all over this? The small businesses. They
Mm-hmm.
can't afford to be all over it. So you're going to find that you're going to start weeding out small businesses from contract awards. And when you do your market research, by the way, you should be asking how many small businesses or any businesses, if this is a criterion of award, how many can comply? And if the answer is not any, then you're not going to do a set aside. I think.
Well,
Maybe
and
you
I
guys
think
can
what
disagree. That's what I think.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
well, I was just going to volunteer that because when I was attending some of those senior leader meetings at then called DTAP, DPC, um, there was a lot of discussion from the various leaders there in regards to the 252, 204, 7012, because industry was highly resistant to this. But on the government side, there was this thought process that nobody was, well, and it wasn't just, I mean, industry was a little bit resistant, but then nobody was actually, there was no enforcement mechanism. So you had this 252, this clause at 204 7012 saying, oh, you need to start reporting, et cetera. And there was no infrastructure in place. And I think this is part of what Biden is encountering with this executive order. There's not like, I mean, and I suspect we'll start seeing this, you know, on the FBI, you know, how you have the counterterrorism unit. Well, now we're going to have the cybersecurity unit that's going to rush out and audit contractors or, you know, do investigations of these various malware attacks. And so I believe these two clauses, because this NIST self-assessment is actually the clause version of the cybersecurity maturity model, which is the provision iteration of it. So they're both kind of the same thing. One is this, you do a rep or assert in advance that you've done this, and then the clause requires you to keep doing it and to comply with the cyber, you know, the security model, maturity model. And so this, it's an attempt to bring some degree of enforcement to a clause that we've had since 2000 and, you know what, 13. um, and so, but how are we going to now enforce this? You know, it's basically, we're going to say, okay, did you report it? But how are we going to know whether it was a valid report, or, you know, is there going to be independent audits of it? You know, it's very hard to tell.
Hey, look, Nick, it looks like contractors are already required to do this. So, like in order to be considered for award, if the offer is required to implement NIST SP 800-171, the offer
Yeah,
shall have a current assessment for each
yeah,
covered
I agree.
contractor information
It's
system.
already, that's what but they're not enforcing it, Don. They're not turning people away.
Mhm.
At least I haven't heard of any. I haven't seen any news reports
This is
about,
pretty new, though. It's November
unless they're
2020.
congressmen. Right? I
Well, I
suspect,
discovered a series of I was going to say I discovered a series of contracts that required subcontracting plans, but nobody had ever obtained or evaluated the subcontracting plans and reported on them. So, you can throw a clause in anything, but unless someone in the government
Right.
actually monitors it.
You know what I think? Was that was it Cyber Command? Is that who we were talking about before? I think part of Cyber Command should spend their time trying to hack contractor systems. And if they get in, then it's, they don't do any damage or anything. They just say, hey, we got in. Like it's,
I do know that DoD has a special separate cyber assessment team. I heard about it through an industry group. They're going around and they're testing certain major contractors that are important to national security. Just as you say, Don, they're not hacking it, but they're going in and asking a whole bunch of questions. And contractors are being scored on that. I believe the highest score possible is 110 points, but I don't know if that means there's 110 things they care about, or I don't know how it's weighted. But what I'm saying is they're kind of already sort of doing that, at least with the limited resources they have to do it. And contractors that score well at that are touting it. Contractors that don't score well pretend it never happened.
yeah, I'm thinking like,
Well,
you know how with TSA, they try and send through some stuff to see if the screeners catch it or not, to do something
Yes.
like that. And then we use that in award decisions. But go ahead, Jennifer. Do you have something?
Well, I was just going to say, when I was reading about this, I don't know if I was asleep at the wheel or if it was because of the virus shutdown, but now there's this new agency, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, that was stood up in 2019, um, part of Homeland Security, but it's completely unclear to me. Like, I even went to the website and I was like, where did this come from? And it's like they're standing up all this bureaucracy, but it's very unclear how they interact with each other. So how is this Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency going to support with Cyber Command, and how is that going to, interact with, say, the FBI or, these other things out there? I think that's part of what we're dealing with.
Yeah, that's a new
And the other
agency for
thing,
me. I haven't heard of them.
no, I haven't heard of them either. The other thing we're missing, though, is the response, nationwide response. And this is not my original observation. Um, what happens if we determine that it was a certain state actor that breached our cyber systems? What does the country do about it? Like, if it's a military thing, what I call it, kinetic warfare, if there's an event, they have a response figured out. Like, they know how it escalates, a proportionate response. The comment I saw said, we don't have anything like that for cyber. And until we figure out the country's responses to cyber attacks, we're going to be missing a piece of the pie.
You,
So
you,
the
you think
observer
this
comment.
country?
I agree with it. Sorry?
You think this country doesn't have a response?
That's what the commenter was saying. I mean, maybe they do and it's top secret and I don't see it. Like, let's say, let me just give you a hypothetical. Let's say there's a pipeline carrying gasoline to the East Coast that gets locked up. Now, recently it was from ransomware and you could buy your way out of it, but let's say it's a hostile action and somebody shuts it down as a prelude to some other action. What do we do? The person that I read said, we don't have a plan. As a country, we don't have a plan for what to do if that happens. Is
Well,
that an
in
act of war?
theory,
Do we go and nuke the capital of the country that did it? No, because that's probably an overreaction. But what is the right reaction? Sorry, Jennifer.
Well, I was going to say the section 6 of this executive order kind of implies that, where it says standardizing the federal government's playbook for responding to cybersecurity vulnerabilities and incidents. Though, if you read the text of it, what that section 6 actually gets into is standardizing how to react internally versus how to react externally, like with other state actors or terrorist organizations or whatever.
I would think that's top secret.
You think it would be?
Yeah, I think it's like Stuxnet type stuff. You remember Stuxnet?
I do know what you're talking about. So
Yeah,
does Iran.
yeah. Um,
Okay, but okay.
I also think that I don't know how this can be confirmed, but after those ships started running into each other a couple years ago, like a cargo ship was running into a Navy ship and all that, all of a sudden we had this scenario at DAU about something like that happening, but it wasn't military ships. It was like commercial ships. So I think that might have been at play, um, when that happened. So I
I
think we got a lot of things up our sleeve.
I would like to hope you're right. I mean, of course I hope you're right. But okay.
Hmm.
So, somebody messes with our pipeline, we should mess with their pipeline, right? Is that what you're saying?
So you think like if we can prove Russia did that instead of like a rogue Russian hacker, we should respond in
Well,
kind.
much like Jennifer said about ethical violations, it's always a rogue employee, even if the rogue employee was the CEO. It's always a rogue bunch of Russians acting without the knowledge of the state, right? When is it not going to be that? So, that's my answer to your. Anyway, I don't want to dwell on it because this is a contract, but I think there's a whole bunch of things or legs that go with this topic, and we just probably talked about 10% of them here
Yeah,
tonight. And it will continue to evolve very quickly.
yeah. All right. Jennifer, do you have something to say?
Well, I was just going to say for kind of my closing thoughts, and then you guys can give your closing thoughts, is that my sense is this will help. I don't think it will get us anywhere close to where we would need to be from a security standpoint. Um, my personal opinion is I think the federal government needs to reevaluate its need for information, where and how it stores information, and the systems that it uses, and maybe kind of create two classes. Um, you know, I hate saying it, but is a Dodia school hack going to be as critical as a, you know, COCOM hack? Probably not. And so I feel like that's kind of what needs to happen is there just needs to be this very clear, like, okay, here's how we use information, here's what we store, here's what people do. Because right now we've just gone, oh, computers and anything that has a computer, and we're just plugging everything in. And I just feel like, you need to maybe look at how and when what we're using that is computerized, and do some security analysis from that point also.
Nick, final thoughts?
I think that the partnership with contractors cannot be overemphasized. I mean, I know it's my favorite thing to talk about, but the federal government, especially the Department of Defense, doesn't really do much of anything anymore without contractors involved in some aspect, in some way. And so it's not just securing the federal computers, it's securing the prime contractors' computers and the next tier subcontractors' computers, and so on and so forth. And while the largest prime contractors can certainly afford and will invest in their controls and their security, you quickly get to the point where there are contractors who can't afford to do that. And so there is a risk, I think it's a real risk, that you're now going to cut them out of the marketplace. If you insist on compliance, as you should. So then you get to how do they fund it? I will just add, I know of one, I'll call them a non-traditional defense contractor who just received a grant from the state government to improve their cybersecurity so they can compete for more Department of Defense awards. So that, I suspect, is the precursor of what needs to happen. There needs to be grants given out so that companies who otherwise won't be able to afford to can improve their cybersecurity and defenses so that they can be a trusted supplier to the Department of Defense.
Yeah, as you were talking, I thought if these new rules do have the effect of kind of narrowing the market, that makes less targets for the enemy, right? So yeah, I do think maybe when we start imposing these rules, it shouldn't be like a contractor's a contractor. I think there should be some kind of I don't know, some kind of consideration of risk. And to me, it doesn't seem like that. It seems like everything needs to be, NIST compliant, and I don't know, might be going a little overboard. But that's all I got on this. And next time we meet up, we'll have something more interesting, maybe more interesting, to talk about than this. I don't know whose turn it is to pick, but anyway, we'll see you in 2 weeks, everybody. Thanks for joining us.